Welcome back to Breakfast Central, and if you're just joining us, a number of conversations have been had so far, but you can catch up with some of these conversations via our live stream. We're going to be also looking at the papers this morning and maybe opening the phone lines for you to join us, but we have our analyst here with us, Dayo Akintobi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. Let's start with this Nigerian newspaper, and on the front page of This Nigeria, hello, I'm back. I hope I said it in my most Donald Trumpish voice. With his decisive victory, Trump becomes the second defeated president in U.S. history to win a fresh White House term, 132 years after Grover Cleveland achieved defeat. Donald Trump shocks the world, returns to the Oval Office after knocking out Kamala Harris. World leaders, including Tinubu, his counterparts in Mexico, Ukraine, Egypt, Canada, and the UK felicitate him. Discos raise meter prices second time in 4 months. Let the poor breathe. Lagbaja, sad end of Chief of Army Staff. President Akpabio, others mourn. And that's all on This Nigeria newspaper. Let's head to our next paper.
Yeah. All right, away from This Nigeria, let's go to the Daily Independent. It says here, tributes for Lagbaja's Tinubu orders flags flown at half-mast. Akpabio, Oluremi Tinubu, Defense Minister Oyebanji, and others mourn. We can also find here, Tinubu and world leaders congratulate Trump on election victory as Harris concedes defeat. Monopoly in oil and gas sector, recipe for disaster. Oil marketers tell court. Obasanjo, Jonathan Tambuwal, Igbenedion, and others celebrate Obasanjo's achievements and impact in 8 years. I'm looking at just the relevant ones. Now, my predecessor, Lagbaja, was courageous and thoroughbred professional, says the acting Chief of Army Staff, Oloyede. I think those are the stories that we can take from the Daily Independent. Let's move to our next paper this morning.
All right, on our next paper, the Punch newspaper says, we were starved, locked up with criminals, according to the minors. Police deny maltreatment as released protesters narrate 3-month ordeal behind bars. Consumers protest as discos hike meter price by 28%. I'm sure that my stage group will have sent updates by now. Lagos sanctions Julius Berger over engineer's death on site. Lagos-Calabar Highway, property owners reject 18 billion naira compensation. World leaders salute Trump as president-elect vows to end illegal migration. Tinubu eyes cordial U.S.-Africa relations. Harris concedes rates. Diplomats list expectations. Marketers sue Dangote, insist on petrol imports. Banks free to trade with deposited FX, says CBN. Tinubu governors, CDS, others mourn Lagbaja. Police train personnel to tackle election violence. INEC tests beavers at mock accreditation. Let's begin with the big story there. Well, hello, I'm back, Donald Trump says 4 years later in a keenly contested, somewhat bitter election. We've seen Donald Trump emerge as the 47th president of the United States. Your thoughts on the election process?
The American people have spoken. I mean, in the run-up to the election, up until the very last day, we kept hearing how razor-thin the margins were and how close and neck. But at the end of the day, it turned out to be a blowout, which means that polls should not be given as much credibility.
From social media?
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, you don't really know what's in the heart of any voter, because when they get inside that polling booth, it's just the voter and his conscience. And it's not necessarily what he will tell you when he comes out of the polling unit. But at the end of the day, I think what made the difference in the election is that Trump was speaking to the minds of rural America, which is really where the population really is. We look at America and we think, it's like thinking all of Nigeria is Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. It doesn't work that way. You notice Kamala Harris won the major conurbations, Los Angeles, California, New York, Illinois, the big cosmopolitan areas where they're educated people, they're the elite, they're the wealthy. Those are the ones who voted for the Democratic Party. But core America lives in the suburbs, the rural areas. They're the ones that call the country bumpkins. Sometimes they call them skinheads. Sometimes they call them rural, up-country, farm-type people. That's where the real hardcore population is. And Trump spoke the language they wanted to hear. 2 key things, the economy and immigration. Those 2 factors were really key to rural America, and I think that's really what made the difference. I think Kamala was at a bit of a disadvantage. She came in 107 days to the election. She was an accidental candidate. She wasn't planned for the role because Biden had indicated that he was going to contest for a second term. And so she wasn't adequately prepared. She hadn't been groomed over the last 4 years. If she had been the heir apparent during her tenure as vice president, they would have been giving her some assignments and putting her in the limelight and making sure that she had a legacy in the hearts and minds of the people. But because she came in at the last minute, she didn't really have a platform per se. If you're to think back, what can you really identify Kamala with? What groundbreaking policy, legislation, initiative, what even philosophy, political philosophy, can you identify her with? She was only able to say on the campaign trail that she will toe her principles line. Now, her principle to the rest of America hasn't performed really well. They're not happy with the Biden administration. And here she is. It's kind of akin to President Tinubu saying, I will follow
Buhari.
From where Buhari
Which
left
he did.
off. Which he did. And which didn't sit well with a lot of Nigerians because we believe Buhari didn't do very well. So somebody who's coming in saying, I will continue from where he left off means he's going to inflict more hardship on us. So that was the same thing that happened with Harris, was that she didn't really have anything to point to that could be a galvanizing rod that the people could hold on to and say, this is what we expect if she comes in. So I think that worked to her disadvantage.
Oh, well, I mean, I had pretty much the same argument earlier. I don't think there's much to be added.
I think another area to add is how this impacts Nigeria, because that's one of the things that we've seen. A number of Nigerians who were not even as invested in Nigerian politics have been invested in the American politics. So you may speak to some of the ways you think that this impacts Nigeria and why Nigerians are disinvolved.
Well, let's look at the history of the two parties to begin with. Nigerians typically have leaned more in the direction of the Conservative Party, which is the Republican Party, because they're Bible-thumping, God-believing moralists, the Republican Party. So they go against things like abortion. They go against things like same-sex marriage, which the Democratic left-wing liberals have always pushed. I mean, the same-sex marriage was signed by Obama, for crying out loud, right? So because Nigeria is a very religious country, our values have dovetailed more with the conservative movement in America. And as a result, you find people believing in things like prayer in schools, for example. The Democratic Party, the liberal left, have been saying, it's against my child's right for him to be subjected to the Lord's Prayer at assembly in school in the morning, that you can't force religion down my child's throat. And
same thing with the gender issues, forcing down,
absolutely.
On children.
And so I think that Nigerians generally have leaned more in we're a conservative set of people in terms of our values and principles. So how does this election more or less affect Nigeria? Because at the end of the day, that to me was the major concern, was which of these two candidates will work well for Nigeria? Look, for example, in Bill Clinton's time, he passed something called the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, which liberalized our ability to export our products for sale to the United States. Now, that's groundbreaking legislation that worked to our advantage because there were tariffs that were lowered. The barriers to trade were lowered for African countries, including Nigeria, under Bill Clinton. So I now ask myself that when Trump was in office the first time, what did he do that was to Nigeria's advantage? The one thing that comes to mind, I just heard it like 3 days ago when President Buhari was interviewed. He said when he sat down with President Trump, Trump asked him, why are you killing Christians in Nigeria? Point blank, looked him face straight dead eye in the eye and said, why are Christians being persecuted in your country? At the end of the day, in spite of everything that's said about Donald Trump and all the negative rhetoric that's thrown at him, he's actually very, very grounded in Christianity and religion, and he wears it on his lapel. He doesn't hide it. So for him to have taken President Buhari up on the fact that Christians were being persecuted in this country, President Buhari said he was taken aback. He had to stammer a little bit and say, well, it's not Nigerians that have been targeted. And Trump had his facts. He says, no, in Benue State, they're bombing churches and they're taking Christians out and they're shooting them. No, your country is persecuting Christians under your administration. And what are you going to do about it? So I think to that extent that we can look at a Trump presidency as one that would protect human and civil rights, will promote moral values, especially in countries like in developing nations. I also think he will probably give more military support. That whole Super Tucano thing, it took quite a long time for it to manifest, but the discussion to provide military support to Nigeria to fight banditry and terrorism actually started from Trump. We asked Obama to do it, he refused. In fact, I think at the end of the day, for all the hoopla about Obama being a black man, he was the worst president for black Africa in terms of what he's represented to us.
I don't know what you drink, but
Yeah.
I owe you 2 bottles of it.
Yes.
I think that was the same conversation, that Trump described allegedly described the president as lifeless in 2018. Yeah.
Yes.
Quickly, let's talk about Kemi Badenoch. Badenoch. Oh, okay. And of course, there's been a bit of controversy with how she's addressed Nigeria, how she's described Nigeria, her roots, and what's the relevance of maybe expecting that she will have a different approach towards treating, Nigerians in diaspora or Nigeria generally as a leader of the Conservative Party? Should we be expecting anything from her?
Well, there are 2 schools of thought. There's one school of thought that says all the things she said were just a political strategy to get to win the leadership of the Conservative Party. That in many public appearances in the past, she has acknowledged her Nigerian heritage. She has appeared at Nigerian diaspora events. She's always basically promoted her Nigerian heritage. There's another school of thought that says she's disparaged her Nigerian heritage and that she basically has promoted her candidacy on the basis of the fact that she doesn't want the UK to become what she ran away from in Nigeria, and that's essentially what she's going to devote her tenure if she, both as a leader of the party and if she becomes the substantive prime minister down the road, she will work and labor to ensure that the UK doesn't become a country like Nigeria where you fear for your life, where infrastructure is dilapidated. She had a laundry list of issues that she claims she confronted in Nigeria during her time here. Well, my view about this is that you can't really choose where you're born. You're an accident of geography where you're born, but you can choose where you reside.
Yep.
You can choose where you settle. You can choose who you are loyal to, who you are patriotic to. Kemi has chosen to be British, even if she was born to Nigerian parents. She was born in the UK, spent some time in Nigeria, went back to the UK. She has made her choice to be a British citizen. She has sworn allegiance and loyalty to the British Constitution, the British flag, the monarchy. And that is what has taken her to where she is today. Now, I heard that NIDCOM, the Diaspora Commission, contacted her yesterday or tried to reach her and said she snubbed them. And I'm saying, well, first of all, what are you calling her for to begin with? I don't understand what you think you stand to gain, except for this our Nigerian way of saying...
It's our daughter. Our daughter is doing well in the UK.
Absolutely. But I'm not surprised she didn't respond because her loyalty is to the crown at this point in time. And she's speaking at this point for about half of the country, if not more than half of the country. And so I don't expect her to have divided loyalty at this point and be more or less giving an ode to her Nigerian-ness, which was the statement that the chairman of the Diaspora Commission said. We can't force anybody to be Nigerian,
we can't force her.
But we would hope she would embrace her Nigerian-ness. And I said, no, she's not trying to embrace her Nigerian-ness. She has jettisoned that because she cannot be a leader of a primary party in the UK and have any part of Nigerian-ness.
Same way that I felt. And I said it earlier, her focus right now is the British people.
Absolutely.
I feel like NIDCOM, if you want to send a congratulatory message,
very good.
And let it go.
Yes.
Why are you calling her?
No, wrong.
No, to call her our daughter.
Totally.
Our daughter is
Yeah,
and that's a typical Nigerian thing. We tend to appreciate people more when they've gone abroad and become celebrated abroad. Let's try to start creating opportunities for our own to thrive. Let's start to celebrate them in here, not waiting for them to quote-unquote blow abroad before we start to see their value.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's come back to the papers. Dangote is still in the news again. He's in the news for, they said marketers sue Dangote, insist on petrol import on the Punch newspaper, the front page of the Punch. Initially, we heard about Dangote, trying to sue to stop them from importing. They accused him of monopoly. It doesn't seem like his rest is anytime soon. As at yesterday too, and I'll be taking that much later, he was trending as well for those who were asking him to throw his support behind Peter Obi in 2027, the way that Elon Musk threw his support behind Donald Trump during the elections. But your thoughts on this Dangote brouhaha?
Well, first of all, just as an aside, no Nigerian businessman worth his salt will ever openly support a candidate because of the risk that if that candidate loses, he'll be out of favor. So they all sit on the fence or they support both candidates. They give money to this, give money to that. But to openly support one candidate in Nigeria is to risk complete
annihilation
obliteration. Total.
Is it that Elon Musk has that much money that there's no way they can do without him? No. Or it's just that it's who Elon Musk is. He will throw his support behind who he will throw his support and damn the consequences.
No, it's that in America, the institutions are so strong that even if you back a candidate and that candidate loses, they can't do anything to you. They can't come and annihilate your business simply because you are not in favor with the current party in power. The institutions are too strong for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there is the fear that institutions will be weaponized against you here.
Yes.
But over there, not so easily. And I think, let me also just say that I think that narrative which you just shared now is true, but I think that it is failing. In the last couple of years, we've also seen those things being weaponized against perceived enemies of America, or I mean, if you look at it even in the global scale itself, you see the International Criminal Court is weaponized against whoever it is that they don't want, or rather whoever it is that they want to punish. It's pretty much the same thing. And so I think Elon Musk had a genuine concern that this was do or die for him. If he didn't win this election, he said it repeatedly that he was going to be finished. They would have come for him and come for him hard. Well, yes, the institution would have protected him somehow, some way. The justice system would not let him be buried so easily, no doubt. But it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have tried, or he wouldn't have been bruised.
Well, the way they would have gone after him probably would be things that would affect his business, things like tax cuts, things like regulations, things like permits. But to be open season on you as an individual in the way it can happen in Nigeria, that wouldn't have happened to Elon Musk. The Justice Department wouldn't have indicted him on charges for anything. See how they even tried to go and say the 1 million he was giving in the campaign, in the run-up. They took him to court about it, and the court ruled that he wasn't violating any election laws by doing that. So I think it would have been protected to some extent. That's not to say they wouldn't have found roundabout ways to seek to attack him. But going back to what Olive was asking in terms of Dangote, where we are now is that the independent marketers are saying it's cheaper for them to import than what Dangote is offering to sell their petrol at. And Dangote is saying that if you can buy it any cheaper than what I'm offering to sell it for, it must be substandard petrol. So there's this ongoing, continuing wrangle between Dangote and all the stakeholders in the petroleum industry. And I think NNPC sits right in the middle of that mess. And NNPC, probably we should put all the blame at NNPC's feet. I think it's a cesspit of corruption, incompetence, and I don't even understand why the leadership is still in place, because when NNPC was a government entity, the person who's the current leader was still the leader. When it became a private entity where it has a board of directors and it has corporate governance and we still have the same person that's still at the helm. I don't think that's correct. I think there should have been a fundamental shift in how it is being run once it became privatized. So I think until NNPC is broken up into pieces and restructured, I don't really see any sanitization of the oil sector per se.
Would you have expected, that with the controversy we've seen in the oil and gas sector with, Dangote, with the NNPC, we would have a National Assembly summon, that we would have, a proper conversation to understand exactly what is going on. It took a while before Dangote was even able to declare how much he was selling petrol. Independent marketers have been begging him to sell, petrol directly to them. NNPC initially had said that they were no longer middlemen, but that turned out to be a lie. So would you have expected the National Assembly, to see this as a burden enough to summon these people?
National Assembly is only interested in Bobrisky and VeryDarkMan. Sorry. National Assembly, they have oversight committees. They ask for jeeps so that they can go and do their oversight. But at the end of the day, they oversight trivialities. This is a crisis. It's a national crisis that affects every single Nigerian. They should have waited in ages ago. It shouldn't be at this point when the whole thing has now, spiraled out of control that we're now seeing if the National Assembly will intervene or not. But I think that clearly the bottom line for Nigerians is that we had anticipated that when Dangote refinery comes on stream and we can get locally refined petrol, our problems will be over. Yeah. We assumed that fuel prices would drop. We'd be able to, food prices would drop because of that, transportation prices. It'll have a knock-on effect. That was our assumption. Well, the opposite has happened. Since Dangote started refining his petrol, the price of petrol has gone up at least twice. Yeah. Right. So that whole notion of renewed hope is starting to get scary.
I think final one, as quickly as you can, the discos. They've raised meter prices by 28.3%. The national grid has collapsed for the 10th time. We don't know how many more times it will collapse for before 2024 ends. What are your thoughts on the power sector?
Power sector is just as bad as the oil and gas sector, is just as bad as the security sector. Bottom line is, I don't even think we should be paying for meters to begin with because we don't own them. They're owned by the National Electricity Regulatory Commission. I don't see why consumers should be the ones to pay. But it's a scam because what they do is they have a free program, the IMAP, where you can sign up for it and get it for free. But it takes you 10 months to 2 years to get it under the free program. And during that time, you're on estimated billing where they're giving you astronomical bills. So everybody's too scared of so you will go down the route of pay for it and get it next week. So at the end of the day, it's just still all a scam to find a way to extort money from Nigerians. But we don't even mind paying if we get power. We don't mind paying the higher tariff. We don't mind paying for the meter, but we need to have uninterrupted power supply, which we are not getting. So it's a double negative at the moment.
Quickly to speak on this, we were starved and locked up with criminals, and that's the minors who the president has now asked that they be released, after, of course, the story went viral a couple of days ago.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't have expected any different treatment for them once they were arrested as having committed a crime. Then they would normally go through the custodial process, which means being locked up in general population, being fed 1 meal of beans within 6 a day or whatever it is they feed them in prison. So there would have been no preferential treatment because remember, the idea of them being minors came out after the fact. So when they were apprehended, when they were detained, at that point in time, they were common criminals and they would have been treated as such. So that part of the story, I don't see anything unconscionable or wrong about that aspect. Of course, the entire arrest, first of all, of protesters who are protesting bad governance. The fact that they were arrested at all was wrong. Then to compound it by the fact that some of them were now underage makes it all the more terrible. But glad the presidency weighed in on it. I was a bit worried about the way he did it because he was already going through a judicial process. The judge had given them bail.
And do you agree with the bill that the judge gave?
He gave the honorable 500,000
in comparison
slapped the boatman. And he gave 10 million to wretched, poor street kids who can't even afford a meal. So, but you weigh the charges, and some are charged with treason, which under normal circumstances, if it's real treason, it's not bailable. It's not bailable. It's not bailable if it's real. But you look at those kids and you know that those ones were not trying to
even if they were waving flags.
Isn't that something that, you would expect the judge to be able to, have his own discernment and say, or think otherwise?
The judge
what I'm pointing out here is, it's just a huge flaw in our criminal justice system, and the people who run that system.
How independent is the judge? If the Attorney General or somebody or the Chief of Staff of the President calls the judge and says, we want to deal with these people, he will kowtow to what his paymasters say. The judge is not as independent as we would like him to be. So that's why you see these wide disparities. 500,000 for somebody who can afford 10 million and 10 million for somebody who can't even afford 100,000. Those disparities are there because justice in Nigeria is still a work in progress. The practice of jurisprudence in Nigeria doesn't guarantee a fair or even a true outcome. Remember, the whole purpose of justice is a search for the truth. Anytime you are brought up on charges for anything, there is a process that seeks to determine what actually happened and apportion blame or approbation to the right parties. So if the processes along the way are already compromised, that search for the truth becomes made rubbish of. So, yeah.
Even just to going back to how the charge sheet was even drawn.
Absolutely.
Who actually charged those children for treason? You know, the police that arrested them and threw them into the same prison with adults.
And the Inspector General is saying he wants to do an investigation. I'm asking myself, is it possible?
Can the police investigate itself?
First of all, can the police investigate? Secondly, is it possible that the Inspector General didn't even know or wasn't the one who even gave the order for those people who are out there protesting to be arrested and locked up?
Police have denied the maltreatment of these protesters, according to the reports on the papers, but it's not a good look. Again, I don't really have faith that anything will come out of whatever investigation they're instituting. Probably. It's just going to, I think it's just to calm the nerves of Nigerians for now, and then we'll move on to other things.
Absolutely.